She was supposed to be home by 7:30 that evening. The porch light was on. The dinner she had prepared that morning was warming in the slow cooker, and her 11-year-old daughter had already set the table for two. But 7:30 came and went. Then 8 o'clock. Then 9. By 10, the phone calls started going to voicemail, and by midnight, the daughter was sitting on the front porch in her pajamas, wrapped in a blanket, staring down the empty street like somehow her mother would just appear out of the darkness if she waited long enough. She never did. This is the story of a woman who gave everything to save lives, only to have someone decide that her life was worth nothing at all. This is the story of a community that thought it knew everyone, a town where doors were left unlocked and neighbors waved at each other from their driveways. This is the story of how that trust was shattered in a single night, and how the truth, when it finally came out, was more devastating than anyone could have imagined. My name is not important. What matters is that I am going to tell you everything. Every detail, every twist, every horrifying revelation that turned this case into something that still haunts the people of Willow Creek, Oregon to this day. And I need you to stay with me until the very end, because if you leave now, you will miss the moment when everything you think you know about this case gets completely turned upside down. Before we go any further, I need to ask you something. If you have ever known someone who simply vanished, if you have ever felt that sickening twist in your stomach when someone you love does not come home, then you understand why this story matters. You understand why it needs to be told. And if this story resonates with you, if it makes you think about the people in your own life, I need you to share this with someone right now. Hit that share button. Subscribe to this channel. Because stories like this one need to be heard, and the only way that happens is if people like you help spread them. Do that for me. Do that for the daughter who sat on that porch waiting for a mother who would never walk through that door again. Now let me take you back to the beginning. Willow Creek is the kind of town that exists in 1,000 different places across America. Population just under 8,000. One main street with a diner, a hardware store, a pharmacy that has been family-owned for 3 generations. The kind of place where the high school football games are the biggest events of the fall, where everyone knows everyone, and where the same families have lived for decades, their roots going so deep into the soil that leaving feels impossible. Sarah Mitchell had lived in Willow Creek her entire life. She was born at the very hospital where she would later work as a registered nurse, delivered by a doctor who would become her mentor and eventually retire just a year before she disappeared. She went to Willow Creek Elementary, Willow Creek Middle School, and graduated from Willow Creek High in 2006. She married her high school sweetheart when she was 22, divorced him when she was 29, and raised her daughter Lily on her own ever since. Everyone in town knew Sarah. They knew her smile, the way she always had time to stop and talk even when she was running late. They knew her dedication to her patients, the extra hours she worked, the way she would show up on her days off just to check on someone who was recovering from surgery. They knew her as the woman who organized the annual charity run for the children's ward, who baked cookies for the nurses' station every Christmas, who never seemed to have a bad word to say about anyone. But what they did not know, what nobody knew, was that Sarah Mitchell had a secret, and that secret would cost her everything. The night of March 15th, 2024, started like any other shift for Sarah. She clocked in at 7 in the morning, took report from the night nurse, and began her rounds. The medical surgical unit at Willow Creek General Hospital was small, just 12 beds, but Sarah treated every patient like they were the only one who mattered. She checked vitals, administered medications, changed dressings, and sat with an elderly man named Harold who was terrified of the surgery he was scheduled for the next morning. Her co-workers would later tell investigators that Sarah seemed normal that day, maybe a little tired, but who was not tired? The hospital was short-staffed, like every hospital in the country. Nurses were burning out, leaving the profession in droves, and those who stayed were picking up the slack. Sarah had worked 6 days in a row, and this was supposed to be her last shift before a 3-day weekend. At 3:30 in the afternoon, Sarah took her lunch break. She sat in the break room with 2 other nurses, eating a salad she had brought from home and scrolling through her phone. One of the nurses, a woman named Denise Carlson, would later remember that Sarah seemed distracted. She kept checking her phone, typing something, then putting it away, then picking it up again. When Denise asked if everything was okay, Sarah just smiled and said she was fine, just tired, just ready for her days off. Denise did not push. She wishes now that she had. At 6:45 in the evening, Sarah finished her charting, gave report to the night shift, and walked out of the hospital. Security cameras captured her crossing the parking lot, her scrubs still on, her bag over her shoulder, her keys in her hand. She got into her car, a silver Honda Accord with a dent in the rear bumper from a fender bender the previous year. She pulled out of the parking lot at 6:52, and then she vanished. The drive from Willow Creek General Hospital to Sarah's house should have taken exactly 12 minutes. She had made that drive hundreds of times, maybe thousands. She knew every turn, every stop sign, every pothole that the city never seemed to fix. But somewhere along that familiar route, something went terribly wrong. When Sarah did not come home, Lily tried calling her. The phone rang and rang, then went to voicemail. She sent text messages that were delivered but never read. She called the hospital, but they said her mother had left hours ago. By the time Lily called the police, her voice was shaking so badly that the dispatcher had to ask her to repeat herself 3 times. The Willow Creek Police Department was not used to missing persons cases. The last one had been 6 years earlier, a teenager who had run away to Portland with her boyfriend and been found 3 days later, embarrassed but unharmed. They figured this would be the same thing. Maybe Sarah had met someone, gone for drinks, lost track of time. Maybe her phone had died. Maybe there was a simple explanation that would make everyone laugh with relief by morning. But morning came, and Sarah was still gone. The search began at dawn. Every available officer, which in Willow Creek meant exactly 4 people, fanned out across town looking for any sign of Sarah Mitchell or her silver Honda Accord. Volunteers joined them by mid-morning, organized by the same community that Sarah had served for so many years. They searched the roads, the parks, the hiking trails that wound through the forested hills surrounding the town. They knocked on doors, asked questions, put up flyers with Sarah's smiling face on every telephone pole and shop window. By the end of the first day, they had found nothing. I remember the feeling that settled over Willow Creek in those early days. It was like a fog that would not lift, a heaviness that pressed down on everyone's shoulders. People stopped leaving their doors unlocked. Parents started driving their children to school instead of letting them walk. The cheerful waves from driveways became more hesitant, loaded with unspoken questions. If something like this could happen to Sarah Mitchell, it could happen to anyone. Lily stayed with Sarah's mother, a woman named Dorothy who had lived in Willow Creek even longer than her daughter. Dorothy was 73 years old, with arthritis in her hands and a heart that had already survived one attack. The stress of her daughter's disappearance was taking a visible toll. She aged years in a matter of days, her face drawn, her eyes hollow, her voice barely above a whisper when she answered the door for the investigators who came with questions she could not answer. Where would Sarah go if she wanted to disappear? She would not want to disappear. She has a daughter. She has responsibilities. She would never just leave. Did Sarah have any enemies? Sarah? Enemies? She was a nurse. She helped people. Everyone loved her. Was there anything unusual in Sarah's life recently? Anything that might explain what happened? Dorothy thought about it for a long time before answering. She said no, but her hesitation told a different story. The first real break in the case came on day 3. A hiker found Sarah's car. It was parked on a logging road about 15 miles outside of town, deep in the woods where the cell service dropped to nothing and the trees grew so thick that the sun barely reached the ground. The car was locked, the keys still in the ignition, the driver's side door closed. There was no sign of a struggle, no blood, no damage. It was as if Sarah had simply driven out there, parked, and walked away into the forest. But that made no sense. Why would she do that? Where would she go? And how would she have gotten there, since the road was barely passable and Sarah was not the kind of person who went off-roading in her sensible sedan? The police called in help from the state, and suddenly Willow Creek was filled with strangers. Detectives from Portland, forensic specialists, search and rescue teams with dogs trained to track human scent. They combed through the woods for days, looking for any trace of Sarah Mitchell. They found nothing. It was as if the forest had swallowed her whole. But then they started looking at the car more carefully, and that was when things started to get strange. The forensic team found fingerprints inside the vehicle that did not belong to Sarah. They found hair fibers on the passenger seat that were not hers. They found traces of something on the steering wheel that looked like it might be blood, though the tests would take weeks to confirm. And they found something else, something that nobody expected. They found a burner phone hidden under the driver's seat. A burner phone. The kind of phone that people buy when they do not want to be traced. The kind of phone that drug dealers use, that cheating spouses use, that people buy when they have something to hide. Sarah Mitchell, the beloved nurse, the devoted mother, the woman who everyone thought they knew, had been living a secret life. The detectives spent days going through that phone. It had been wiped, but the tech specialists were able to recover some of the data. Text messages, phone calls, nothing incriminating on its face, but all of it to the same number, a number that was registered to a prepaid account with no name attached. The messages were coded. Vague. Times and places, never explicit details. Meet me at the usual place. Tomorrow at 3. I need to see you. We need to talk about what happens next. What happens next? Those 4 words took on a terrible significance as the investigation continued. The police tracked the other phone to a cell tower on the outskirts of town, but that was as far as they could get. Whoever Sarah had been talking to was careful. Whoever they were, they knew how to cover their tracks. Meanwhile, the town was starting to talk. Rumors spread like wildfire in a place as small as Willow Creek. Some people said Sarah had been having an affair and had run off with her lover. Others said she had been involved in something illegal, maybe drugs, maybe worse. A few even whispered that she had staged her own disappearance, that she had been planning this for months, that the devoted mother and dedicated nurse had been nothing but a facade. Lily heard all of it. Every whisper, every cruel speculation, every casual destruction of her mother's reputation. She sat in her grandmother's house and listened to people she had known her entire life saying terrible things about the woman who had raised her. And she refused to believe any of it. I want to pause here and ask you something. Have you ever had your trust in someone tested? Have you ever loved someone so completely that you could not believe anything bad about them, even when the evidence started piling up? I think most of us have been there. That moment when doubt creeps in, when the person you thought you knew starts to seem like a stranger. What would you do in that situation? Would you keep believing, or would you start to wonder? Leave me a comment and tell me what you think, because this is a question that Lily Mitchell was about to face in the most devastating way possible. The investigation continued through April and into May. The blood on the steering wheel was confirmed to be human, but it was too degraded to get a DNA profile. The fingerprints did not match anyone in the database. The burner phone remained a dead end, the other number never answering when the police tried to call it. And then, just when it seemed like the case had gone completely cold, something happened that changed everything. On May 23, 2024, a fisherman found a body in the river. The river that runs through Willow Creek is called the Thompson, named after some pioneer who settled the area 150 years ago. It is not a big river, more of an oversized creek really, but it winds through the forest for miles before eventually joining a larger waterway that feeds into the Pacific Ocean. People fish in it, swim in it during the hot summer months, and mostly forget it is there the rest of the year. The fisherman who found the body was named Robert Chun. He was 62 years old, retired from the post office, and had been fishing that same spot every weekend for the past decade. He would later tell reporters that he knew immediately something was wrong. The shape in the water was too big to be a fish, too still to be an animal. He waited out, his heart pounding, and when he saw what it was, he stumbled backwards so fast that he fell into the water himself. I cannot describe for you what 2 months in a river does to a human body. I will not describe it. What I will tell you is that identification was not easy. The medical examiner had to use dental records, and even then, it took 3 days to be certain. The body was Sarah Mitchell. The news hit Willow Creek like a bomb. Whatever hope people had been holding on to, whatever belief that maybe she was still alive somewhere, that maybe this would have a happy ending, died with that announcement. Sarah was gone. She had been gone all along. And now the question was not where she was, but who had put her there. Dorothy collapsed when she heard the news. She was rushed to the hospital, the same hospital where her daughter had worked for 15 years, and the doctors said her heart was failing under the strain. They kept her for observation, gave her medication, told Lily that her grandmother needed to stay calm, needed to avoid stress. As if that were possible. Lily sat by her grandmother's hospital bed and stared at the wall. She was 11 years old. She had lost her mother. She was about to lose her grandmother, and she still did not know why any of this had happened. The autopsy revealed that Sarah had been strangled. Manual strangulation, the medical examiner said. Someone had wrapped their hands around her throat and squeezed until she stopped breathing. There were other injuries too, defensive wounds on her hands and arms, bruises that suggested she had fought back. Sarah Mitchell had not gone quietly. She had struggled. She had tried to survive. But someone had been stronger. The investigation shifted from a missing persons case to a homicide. The state police took over completely, and the Willow Creek department was relegated to a supporting role. Detectives interviewed everyone who had known Sarah, everyone who had worked with her, everyone who might have had any information about her secret life. And slowly, piece by piece, that secret life began to come into focus. It started with the hospital. One of Sarah's co-workers, a nurse named Jennifer Okonkwo, came forward with information she had been afraid to share before. She said that Sarah had been acting strangely in the weeks before her disappearance. She had been distracted, anxious, checking her phone constantly, and she had been asking questions about patient records, questions that did not make sense given her role in the hospital. What kind of questions? Questions about medications, about dosages, about what would happen if certain drugs were missing from the inventory. The detectives looked into it. They found discrepancies in the hospital's pharmaceutical records, small amounts of controlled substances that had disappeared over the past year. Opioids, mostly. Powerful painkillers that had significant street value. The amounts were small enough that they had been written off as documentation errors, but when added up, they represented thousands of dollars worth of drugs. Had Sarah been stealing medication? Had she been selling it? Was that what the burner phone was for? The more they dug, the more complicated the picture became. Sarah's bank records showed deposits that did not match her salary. Small amounts, never more than a few $100s at a time, but regular. Monthly. They came from cash, deposited at ATMs around town. There was no way to trace where the money had come from. But there was something else in those bank records. Withdrawals. Large ones. In the months before her disappearance, Sarah had been pulling out significant sums of money, far more than her normal expenses would require. The detectives added it up. In the final 3 months of her life, Sarah Mitchell had withdrawn over $15,000 in cash. Where had that money gone? What had she been paying for? The answer came from an unexpected source. Sarah's ex-husband, a man named Michael Mitchell, walked into the police station on June 1st and asked to speak with the detectives. He had been living in Seattle since the divorce, working as an electrician, trying to rebuild his life after what he described as a difficult marriage. He had come back to Willow Creek for the funeral, and he had something to tell them. He said Sarah had called him 2 weeks before she disappeared. She had been crying, nearly hysterical. She said she was in trouble. She said she had made a terrible mistake and did not know how to fix it. She said someone was threatening her, someone dangerous, someone who would hurt her if she did not do what they wanted. Michael asked who. Sarah would not say. She just kept repeating that she was sorry, that she never meant for any of this to happen, that she was trying to protect Lily, that she would do anything to keep her daughter safe. Protect Lily from what? Protect her how? Sarah hung up before Michael could get any answers. He tried calling back, but she did not pick up. He thought about calling the police, but he did not know what to say. He did not know if Sarah was exaggerating, if this was just drama, if maybe she was having some kind of breakdown. He decided to wait, to give her time to calm down, to hope that whatever was wrong would resolve itself. 2 weeks later, she was dead. Michael broke down in the interview room. He blamed himself. If he had just done something, called someone, driven down to check on her, maybe she would still be alive. Maybe he could have saved her. The detectives tried to reassure him. They said that Sarah's killer was responsible for what happened, not him. But the guilt was written all over his face, and I suspect it still is to this day. The investigation now had a new focus. Someone had been threatening Sarah. Someone had been forcing her to do something, probably steal the medications from the hospital. And when she tried to stop, when she tried to get out, they had killed her. But who? The detectives started with the obvious suspects: drug dealers, organized crime, anyone who might have been benefiting from the stolen medications. They reached out to DEA contacts, shared information with federal agencies, tried to trace the distribution network that Sarah must have been a part of. They hit dead ends everywhere they turned. Whoever was behind this knew what they were doing. They had insulated themselves from Sarah, used intermediaries, covered their tracks. The burner phone remained untraceable. The cash deposits remained unexplained. The other person on those text messages remained a ghost. Weeks passed. June turned into July. The summer heat settled over Willow Creek, and people started to go back to their lives. The initial shock of Sarah's death faded, replaced by the dull ache of loss that becomes familiar when tragedy lingers. The investigation continued, but the leads were drying up. The detectives started to talk about cold cases, about unsolved murders, about the possibility that Sarah's killer might never be found. And then Lily remembered something. She was going through her mother's things, trying to hold on to whatever pieces of Sarah she could find. She found old photographs, birthday cards, receipts from grocery stores that somehow felt precious now that her mother would never go shopping again. And tucked into the back of a drawer, hidden behind old tax returns and medical documents, she found a journal. Sarah had been keeping a journal. Not regularly, not daily, but entries scattered over the past year, written in her careful handwriting, documenting everything. Lily read the first entry and felt her blood run cold. The journal told a story that none of them had known. It told the story of a woman who had been struggling financially, trying to keep up with the mortgage on her house, trying to save for her daughter's future, trying to do everything right while never having enough money to make it work. It told the story of a coworker who had approached her with a proposition, a way to make some extra cash, something harmless, something that nobody would ever know about. Just a few pills here and there. Nothing that would hurt anyone. The hospital has insurance. They write this stuff off all the time. Nobody will notice. Nobody will care. And you need the money. Think about Lily. Sarah had said no at first. Of course she had. She was a good person. She was honest. She would never do anything illegal. But the bills kept coming. The car needed repairs. Lily needed braces. The mortgage company sent letters threatening foreclosure. And the coworker kept asking, kept pushing, kept making it sound so easy. So Sarah said yes. Just once. Just a small amount. Just enough to get through the month. And that was how it started. The journal documented the next 12 months in devastating detail. The amounts got larger. The risks got higher. The coworker introduced her to someone else, someone who handled the distribution, someone who Sarah never saw, but who communicated through the burner phone. The money was good, better than good. And for a while, Sarah felt like she had finally gotten her head above water. But then things changed. The person on the other end of the phone started asking for more. More pills. More variety. Things that Sarah did not have access to. Things that would require her to take bigger risks. She tried to say no. She tried to get out. She tried to give back the money and walk away. They would not let her. The threat started. Vague at first, then specific. They knew where she lived. They knew where Lily went to school. They knew her schedule, her habits, her vulnerabilities. If she tried to stop, if she went to the police, if she told anyone what was happening, they would hurt her daughter. They would hurt everyone she loved. They would destroy her life and then end it. Sarah was trapped. She kept stealing, kept lying, kept living this double life that was tearing her apart from the inside. The journal entries became more desperate, more fragmented. She wrote about not being able to sleep, about having panic attacks at work, about looking at Lily and wanting to cry because she had failed her so completely. The last entry was dated March 13th, 2024. 2 days before she disappeared. I know what I have to do. I cannot keep living like this. I cannot keep putting Lily in danger. Whatever happens to me, I have to make sure she is safe. I am going to meet with them one more time. I am going to tell them it is over. I am going to give them everything they want, every dollar I have left, and beg them to leave us alone. And if that does not work, I will go to the police. I will tell them everything. I will accept whatever consequences come my way. At least then it will be over." That was the last thing Sarah Mitchell ever wrote. Lily brought the journal to the police. She handed it over with shaking hands, and the detectives read it in silence, their faces growing grimmer with every page. This changed everything. This gave them motive. This gave them context. And most importantly, this gave them a name. The coworker who had started it all. The person who had recruited Sarah into this nightmare. The individual who had access to her, who knew her vulnerabilities, who had exploited her desperation for their own gain. The name in the journal was David Brennan. David Brennan had worked at Willow Creek General Hospital for 8 years. He was a pharmacy technician responsible for handling and dispensing medications, for keeping track of inventory, for making sure that the right drugs got to the right patients at the right time. He was 41 years old, married with 2 children, active in his church, coached Little League baseball on weekends. Everyone thought he was a great guy. The detectives pulled him in for questioning on July 15th. He came willingly, without a lawyer, completely cooperative. He expressed shock and grief over Sarah's death. He said they had been friends, colleagues, nothing more. He denied any involvement in the stolen medications. He denied threatening her. He denied everything. And then they showed him the journal. I wish I could have seen his face in that moment. I wish I could have watched the mask slip, watched the fear creep into his eyes as he realized that his entire carefully constructed lie was about to come crashing down. The detectives said he went pale. He asked for a lawyer. He stopped talking. But they already had enough to get a search warrant. What they found in David Brennan's house was worse than anyone expected. In his basement, hidden behind a false wall that he had constructed himself, they found records of everything. Names of suppliers, names of distributors, financial transactions going back years. David Brennan was not just a participant in the drug operation. He was running it. He was the one on the other end of the burner phone. He was the one making the threats. He was the one who had recruited Sarah and half a dozen other hospital employees into his network. And they found something else. A pair of surgical gloves with traces of DNA on the inside. DNA that matched David Brennan. And on the outside of those gloves, traces of skin cells that matched Sarah Mitchell. He had killed her himself. The arrest happened at dawn on July 18th. Police cars surrounded David Brennan's house while his family was still asleep. His wife came to the door in her bathrobe, confused, frightened, asking what was happening. His children watched from the upstairs window as their father was led away in handcuffs, as news cameras captured every moment, as the community they had called home turned on them in an instant. The news spread through Willow Creek faster than wildfire. People could not believe it. David Brennan, the Little League coach, the church volunteer, the man who had lived among them for years, who had smiled and waved and pretended to be one of them while secretly destroying lives. But the evidence was irrefutable. The journal, the records, the DNA, the fingerprints in Sarah's car that, when finally matched, belonged to David Brennan. He had driven her to those woods. He had strangled her. He had dumped her body in the river and thought he had gotten away with it. He had been wrong. The trial began in October. The prosecution laid out their case methodically, building a picture of David Brennan as a manipulative predator who had exploited vulnerable people for profit and eliminated anyone who threatened his operation. They called witnesses who testified about his behavior, his control, his willingness to use fear to keep people in line. They showed the jury the journal, read Sarah's words aloud in the courtroom, let them feel the desperation and terror of a woman who had made one mistake and paid for it with her life. David Brennan's defense was that he was being framed. He claimed that someone else was behind the operation, someone higher up, someone who had set him up to take the fall. He pointed fingers at everyone he could think of, trying to create reasonable doubt, trying to convince the jury that things were not as simple as they seemed. Nobody believed him. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. They came back with a verdict of guilty on all counts. Murder in the first degree, drug trafficking, extortion, conspiracy. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. When the sentence was announced, there was no celebration in the courtroom, just a heavy, exhausted silence. Justice had been served, but Sarah was still dead. Lily was still an orphan. Dorothy was still in the hospital, her heart failing, unlikely to survive another month. Nothing could undo what David Brennan had done. Nothing could bring back what had been lost. I want to tell you about what happened next, because this is not just a story about tragedy. This is a story about what comes after, about how people pick up the pieces when their world has been shattered, about how healing happens, slowly and painfully, but it does happen. Lily Mitchell was taken in by her mother's best friend, a woman named Carmen Reyes who had known Sarah since childhood. Carmen had no children of her own, had never planned to have any, but when she looked at Lily, orphaned and broken and so desperately in need of someone to hold on to, she did not hesitate. She opened her home and her heart, and she became the family that Lily needed. It was not easy. Lily was angry for a long time. Angry at the world for taking her mother. Angry at David Brennan for what he had done. Angry at her mother, too, for keeping secrets, for making choices that had led to this, for leaving her behind. That anger came out in all kinds of ways. Outbursts at school, sleepless nights, therapist after therapist trying to help her process what had happened. But Carmen stayed. Through all of it, through every difficult moment, she stayed. She did not try to replace Sarah. She did not pretend that everything was okay. She just held on, steady and patient, and slowly, over months and years, she helped Lily find her way back to something that felt like life. Dorothy did not make it. She died in the hospital 2 weeks after the verdict, her heart finally giving out. Some people said she died of grief, and maybe there was truth to that. But she lived long enough to see her daughter's killer brought to justice. She lived long enough to know that Sarah's death would not go unanswered. And in her final days, she told Lily that she was proud of her, that she knew Sarah would be proud of her too, that the Mitchell women were strong, and that Lily would survive this. Lily held on to those words like a lifeline. The hospital where Sarah had worked underwent a complete restructuring. New security protocols, new inventory systems, background checks and oversight and accountability measures that should have been in place all along. They named the new pediatric wing after Sarah Mitchell, and on the day of the dedication, nurses who had worked alongside her stood in the hallway and wept. The other people who had been part of David Brennan's operation were arrested and prosecuted. Some went to prison. Some made deals in exchange for information about the distribution network. The whole thing was dismantled, piece by piece, until nothing remained but the memory of what it had been and the determination to make sure nothing like it ever happened again. And Lily grew up. She went to middle school, then high school. She made friends, good ones, people who knew what she had been through and did not treat her like she was fragile. She played soccer, badly at first, but with enthusiasm. She discovered that she loved science, loved understanding how things worked, loved the idea that complex problems had solutions if you were patient enough to find them. By the time she was 16, Lily knew what she wanted to do with her life. She wanted to be a nurse, not in spite of what had happened to her mother, but because of it. She wanted to carry on Sarah's work. She wanted to honor her legacy. She wanted to prove that the good her mother had done in the world was not erased by the way she died. Carmen supported her completely. They sat together and looked at college brochures, talked about nursing programs, made plans for a future that finally felt possible. And sometimes, late at night, Lily would take out her mother's journal and read those final entries again. Not to torture herself, not to relive the pain, but to remember, to keep Sarah alive in her memory, to make sure she never forgot where she came from and why she was fighting so hard to build something better. The years passed, as years do. Willow Creek slowly healed from the wound that David Brennan had inflicted. New families moved in. Old wounds scarred over. The town that had been shattered by tragedy learned to trust again, carefully and cautiously, but genuinely. Lily graduated from high school at 18, valedictorian of her class. She gave a speech at the ceremony about resilience, about the people who had held her up when she could not stand on her own, about the power of community to rebuild what has been broken. She did not mention her mother by name, but everyone knew who she was talking about. There was not a dry eye in the auditorium. She went to nursing school in Portland. It was hard, harder than she expected. The coursework was demanding. The clinical rotations were exhausting. There were moments when she doubted herself, when she wondered if she was really cut out for this. when the weight of her mother's legacy felt like too much to carry. But she kept going. She kept showing up. She kept pushing through the doubt and the fear, and by the time she graduated, she knew she had made the right choice. Lily became a nurse. She took a job at a hospital in Portland, working on the same kind of medical surgical unit where her mother had worked. She cared for patients with the same dedication that Sarah had shown. She stayed late. She held hands. She sat with people who were scared and helped them feel less alone. And she never forgot. She kept a photograph of her mother on her desk at home. She visited her mother's grave every year on the anniversary of her death. She told stories about Sarah to anyone who would listen, making sure that the woman she remembered, the loving mother and dedicated nurse, was not overshadowed by the tragedy of how she died. Carmen stayed in her life. They had dinner together every Sunday, no matter how busy their weeks had been. They laughed. They cried. They talked about Sarah and Dorothy and all the people they had lost. And they celebrated the family they had become, not by blood but by choice, bound together by love and shared experience. David Brennan remained in prison, where he would stay for the rest of his life. Lily did not think about him often. He had taken enough from her. She refused to let him take any more of her mental space, any more of her emotional energy. He was where he belonged, and that was all that mattered. The town of Willow Creek eventually put up a memorial in the park downtown. A small plaque with Sarah's name on it, next to a bench where people could sit and rest. It was not much, but it was something. A permanent reminder that she had existed, that she had mattered, that her life had meant something even though it had been cut short. Lily visited that memorial whenever she came home. She would sit on the bench and talk to her mother, telling her about her life, about her patients, about Carmen and the future she was building. She knew Sarah could not hear her. She did not believe in ghosts or spirits or any of that, but it helped. It made her feel connected to the woman who had given her everything. I am telling you this story for a reason. Not just because it is true, though it is. Not just because it is dramatic, though it certainly is that too. I am telling you this story because it matters. It matters because Sarah Mitchell was more than the way she died. She was a mother who loved her daughter. She was a nurse who saved lives. She was a woman who made a mistake under impossible circumstances and tried to make it right. She does not deserve to be remembered only for the tragedy. She deserves to be remembered for the whole of who she was. It matters because Lily Mitchell did not let grief destroy her. She could have. So many people would have. But instead, she took the worst thing that ever happened to her and turned it into something meaningful. She became a healer. She carried on her mother's work. She proved that the cycle of pain can be broken if you are brave enough to break it. And it matters because David Brennan did not get away with it. In a world that often feels unjust, where the guilty go free and the innocent suffer, this is a story where accountability actually happened, where the truth came out, where justice, imperfect and delayed as it was, eventually arrived. Lily is in her late 20s now. She still works as a nurse. She still visits her mother's grave every year. She is thinking about going back to school, getting her master's degree, maybe teaching nursing someday. She wants to train the next generation of nurses, to pass on what she has learned, to make sure that her mother's legacy continues. Carmen is getting older, but she is still sharp, still funny, still the best thing that ever happened to Lily besides Sarah herself. They still have dinner every Sunday. They still laugh and cry and remember. And Willow Creek is still there. Still small. Still quiet. Still the kind of town where people wave from their driveways and leave their doors unlocked. But now they know that darkness can hide in plain sight. They know that the people you trust the most can betray you. And they know that even when the worst happens, even when your world falls apart, there is a way forward. There is always a way forward. I started this story with a girl sitting on her front porch, waiting for her mother to come home. I am ending it with a woman who has found her own way home. Not the home she was born into, but the one she built for herself. A life filled with purpose. A heart that learned to love again. A future that once seemed impossible, but now stretches out before her, full of possibility. Sarah Mitchell vanished in 2024, and the arrest that followed shocked a community to its core. But that is not the end of the story. The end of the story is Lily, living and thriving and healing. The end of the story is a daughter who refused to be defined by her mother's murder. The end of the story is hope, stubborn and persistent, surviving against all odds. That is the story of Sarah Mitchell. And now it is yours too.